let me tell you a story. This is the greatest story in all of MMA. I've known it for years. I've never told it, and why I'm finally going to do it now, I don't know. But it goes back to what you were saying about the CM Punk and, was there a bigger business move and kind of showing up the WWE on one hand. So Dana White really admires Vince. He's always liked Vince. He doesn't always say that publicly. He'll simply say, well, I got a lot of respect for him, and that's where he'll end it. But he really does admire him, and the WWE business model is what the UFC copied, and in so many ways that only you would understand if I started listing them for the viewers. But the way the royalties work, the back ends work, the locker room bonuses, if you will, all of the negotiations, just the way it works, it's very close to the WWE's model. And Lorenzo Fertitta came out as much as to say, look, we studied everybody from the Yankees on down. It's the WWE that we decided to model ourselves around. So, okay, let me start the story. 2005, they are going to fight at the Mohegan Sun, and the UFC in 2005 used to go their pay-per-views on Friday nights before they have now moved to Saturdays. This was also my UFC debut, so I was there for this to happen. So the week of that fight, this is a great story. I'm telling you, this is the hottest story in MMA, and it's never been told. I'm going to do it right now. So
can't wait.
All right, so here it is. And I got to set up a couple of pieces for you, so let me jump around. Now, at the same time in 2005, the UFC had just broken through. They were in the hole. They were going to sell. They were going to close up shop. It's well documented. They're $40 million in the hole. Ultimate Fighter comes out. It's a huge success, changes everything. Well, at that time, the Ultimate Fighter was on Spike TV. And when it was on Spike TV, it was on Monday nights, and it came on right after Raw. So Vince McMahon called Dana White, and the problem Vince had is that they were advertising the Ultimate Fighter during Raw. So Vince is saying to Dana privately, why would anybody watch my scripted show when they can just wait till it's over to watch your real show? Stop advertising to my audience. And Dana shot with him and goes, Vince, I'm on Spike, you're on Spike, that's where it ends. Who Spike decides to run the marketing and the advertising and to piggyback off of, man, it's got nothing to do with me. And Vince again puts it on Dana and says, do not advertise your show during my show again. And Dana's kind of sitting there shrugging his shoulders going, I'm the wrong guy to be calling. Anyway, okay, move on to the next part. Mike Goldberg. Mike Goldberg is an announcer for the UFC. All he does is announce. Now, in fairness, he's the voice. As great as he is, he's extremely replaceable. So you can replace announcers, right? And they're only doing 4 and 5 shows a year back then. It wasn't the same thing as having Mike Goldberg go somewhere now. So the night I was going to fight on my debut, the heavyweight championship was on the line that night. It was Andrei Arlovsky. Andrei Arlovsky, who is the face of the company at that time because Randy Couture had retired and Tito Ortiz was in this big piston match. Andrei Arlovsky's the new face. He's selling all the tickets. He's doing absolutely everything. He's going to get $18,000 to show and $18,000 to win. Now, there wasn't really sponsors back then. There was definitely no fight of the night or backdoor or pay-per-view bonus. None of that even existed. So he's looking at 18 and 18 to headline a card with the biggest prize in all of sport. That's extremely relevant to this story. That week, Vince McMahon contacts Mike Goldberg, and he tells Mike Goldberg, I will give you $100,000 to no-call, no-show the UFC on Friday.
What?
So Goldberg doesn't get to warn anybody. He just can't show up, and he can't call in and warn. He just needs to stick them without an announcer. Goldberg does the right thing, and the very first person he calls is Dana. And Vince tells him, this call never happened, and I will wire you this money on your word. And Goldberg calls Dana and says, here's what just happened. So Dana not only gives Mike Goldberg a brand new $500,000 contract, but right then realized if he's willing to pay $100,000 for my announcer who is replaceable, and I'm only paying my main event 18 and 18, I got a problem. This is a level of thinking, of strategy, of business play that I'm just not ready for. And don't forget, Dana White's only like 45 right now. So in 2005, I mean, he's a young guy. He's 32, 33. He's still trying to figure the world out, and he realizes right then, this is tough. This is a level of thinking that I'm just not competing at this level right now. Not only did Goldberg stay, not only did the business change, the Ultimate Fighter never played Monday nights again. The Ultimate Fighter moved to Wednesdays and has never gone back.
Wow.
That is the number one hottest story in the history of MMA,
great.
and it has never, ever been told, and there it is. So when you ask me, are they thinking about the WWE? Are they thinking about ways that it puts them over, even in a worst-case scenario? Absolutely.
Yes. And look, you can be as successful as you want, and the competitive nature of some people never changes. I've always heard that about Vince McMahon, and I'm sure the same is true of Dana. And I mean, if that's true, if that story is true, and and things are operating on that level back then, that's a grudge that doesn't go away. You know what I mean? That's something that you don't forget very quickly. So with everything that's transpired before and since, I mean, you have to think that there is always. I mean, there's no two ways about it, Chael. They stole a big chunk of the WWE audience. I mean, they didn't steal it; they acquired it. You know, and for as long as many people in the business can like to give these sort of stock answers, like, oh, you know, they're two different things. You know, we're not competing. We're competing with everything in entertainment. You know, yeah, you technically are on the same way that everything is technically competing with everything on television. But let's be real here. Your demos are exactly where they want. You know what I mean? And frankly, that coveted 18 to 34 male demo made a choice. You know, somewhere around 10 years ago, it started, and now it's well and truly entrenched in the UFC camp.
Yeah, it definitely is. You know, they say at the UFC, and I don't know if this number is still true. This dates back a number of years now, but they said it was 4-1 WWE. Whatever we do, they beat us 4-1. They've got 4-1 fans. They've got 4-1 passion. They got 4-1 Google searches, all the different metrics they follow. And it particularly, and this is something that really nobody's been able to tap into, but is merchandise. The business.
The licensing is fantastic.
It's huge. Oh man, I would go to these shows, and you know, the wrestling fans, you know, they're just what the stereotypical fan used to be, right? They don't have a ton of exposable income, but man, if wrestling's coming to town, they're coming. And the lines, Nick, the lines at the merchandise booth, it was unbelievable, and they weren't cutting them any breaks, man. I mean, it was $100 for the replica belt, it was $30 for a shirt, it was $25 for a it was not cheap. And these fans, it did not matter. It didn't matter if they were going to have to go hungry the next day. They were leaving there with something.
Yeah, I wish I could remember the exact numbers, but I remember talking to one of our merch guys, our licensing guys, and he said something to the effect of the average concert, you know, live sporting event, or everything that falls into that kind of bracket, the average take for merchandise is something like $10 per head, but in wrestling, the average take is $40 per head.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And so even with TNA, which was operating on a much smaller level than WWE, you know, especially with the live events, like that was really was a huge lifeblood of their, you know, revenue. While we're talking about the UFC and the WWE and MMA and pro wrestling and the choices between the two, you know, you've mentioned something to me a couple of times, and you've touched on it. And I apologize if you've told this story before or gone into more detail, but you mentioned that you tried out at the power plant, right?
Yes.
Well, so what's the rest of that story? You tried out, and so what was the outcome, and where ultimately did the decision take place for you, where you said, I'm not going to pursue pro wrestling, and when did MMA become the focus that you said, okay, this is where I can, you know, this is what I want to do now. This is where I make my mark.
So it was. This was in 1998, and when the Monday Night Wars were going on, the WCW would advertise, hey, you want to be a pro wrestler? Call this phone number. And they had like a commercial that they would air. And so I finally called the phone number, and it was real simple. You went out to Atlanta. I don't think it cost anything to try out. You just had to get you had to pay your own way out there and do that whole thing.
Right.
And so I get out there. I went in summer of '98, and I was in very good shape. I was an All-American that year in wrestling, and the reason I bring that up is just, I was in really good shape. I was in great. Nick, it was so hard, and the way it worked was, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do 25 push-ups, 25 sit-ups, and 25 squats. That's all we're going to do. But we're going to do this for 8 hours, and when you've had enough, just leave, but do not come back. And the do not come back actually had a little fine print, like you could come back, but you had to wait 12 months. There was a way you could try out again, but basically, man, this was your shot. And Sarge ran it. And the day I started, there was 12 guys, and we were going to do this, 25 push-ups, 25 sit-ups, and 25 squats. We were going to do that for 8 hours for 2 days, and then the third day was a half day. So at any rate, that's all we're going to do. And I remember you could cheat on your push-ups. They'd yell at you, but however a push-up goes, a sit-up's another one where you could do a lot of. But the squats, Sarge brought out 5-gallon buckets, and he turned them upside down. And when you did your squat, you had to come onto your toes, you had to throw your hands up in front of you, and your butt had to touch that bucket.
Right.
And we did so many squats that little tiny lip of the bucket when it's upside down was cutting into my legs, because I didn't know where it was. It's behind me, so you just know to go down till you hit it. We did so many, it was cutting in. By the second day, there was 3 of us left. And that was more like by the second hour, there was 3 of us left. But by the second day, there was 3 of us left. There was me, there was a gentleman who was a cop in Georgia, and there was another gentleman who came in from Jamaica. By the third day, it was still the 3 of us left, but the cop did not get in the car in the morning and come over. He just couldn't get out of bed. And I know what that felt like. I was Epsom salt baths. I had never felt this way, and I was in really good shape at that time.
Yeah.
So the second day ends, and Sarge takes us out in the heat of Georgia, and all we did was the push-ups, sit-ups, and squats. But on the third day, we had to run sprints, and it was just right there in the power plant parking lot. Sprint down to one side, catch your breath, sprint back to the side. Sprint to the other side, and he just ran sprints hoping one of us would quit. We both hung in there. Now, at that time, and this is relevant, that's when they were kind of introducing the cruiserweight. Your stars of AJ Styles, of Chris Jericho, of CM Punk, that was not happening back then. But they did have the cruiserweights, and they were telling me, look, you're probably going to have to be a high flyer. I was weighing 196 pounds.
Right.
And I wanted to be Hulk Hogan, right? I wanted to be Stone Cold. I didn't really want to do that, but okay, fine. If that's what I got to do, then I'm in. I had 2 years of college left, so I went back. I finished college. By the time I was done, they were out of business, and I simply did not know how to get a hold of the WWE. We didn't have, Twitter wasn't around, Facebook wasn't around. Tracking down phone numbers, you had to be a detective to do it. People were just getting into email. I simply ended my pro wrestling dreams because I didn't know how. I didn't know who to call.
So in your mind, it was like, I'm going straight to the big time, that you didn't think about doing like independence and getting seen that way.
Or even know how. I didn't know how to. Now, looking back, I was 21 years old. Looking back, of course, I could figure that in 5 minutes now. I could give somebody else advice. Let's jump on a phone. Let's call Nick. Nick can give us a number. Now I know people, but back then, no, I didn't know how to do it. And we even had a hot little scene in the Northwest. We had, man, Don Owen died and things changed. But, yeah, we had huge stars. I could go through the list from, Ric Flair came through the territory, but Snuka got his start out here. Piper got his start out here.
Yeah, Portland was one of the big territories.
One of the best workers on the mic of all time. I hope you're familiar with him, but his name is Len Denton. He wrestled under a mask as the Grappler. I would put him head-to-head with anybody, including Stone Cold, interview for interview. One of the best ever.
And Stone Cold is a big fan of Len Denton. He's mentioned it many times.
I see Len all the time. He works at a Home Depot around here. He doesn't wear the mask. He works out at the gym every single day for about 5 hours. Doesn't work super hard, but he's in that gym about 5 hours a day every day. It's his hobby. He's never not there.
Yeah, how do you because that's the thing. When you told me the time frame and you would give me and you said it was a power plant and this and that, and I thought to myself, the one thing that would have really been an issue back then would have been your size, because it was still very much, even though obviously everyone's size was greatly embellished, it was still, it was still a good, 3 or 4 years before there was a good number of those guys who were sort of like the Guerreros and Benoits and Jerichos and stuff who were really given their due. And it probably would have been tough for you in that respect, given how you saw yourself. But ultimately, Chael, it's obvious when you look at your career in the UFC that had you been given the opportunity, which is really ultimately all it comes down to, you would have. I mean, I do believe that you could have taken the ball and run with it, but at the same time, timing is everything, and in many ways, it worked out better for you because the UFC overtook WWE in terms of pay-per-view buys and live event attendances, and you were, for a time, you were the highest paid guy in the UFC, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I had my window. Yep.
Yeah, and so in that respect, it's like we talked about the last time we spoke. In many ways, you were fortunate because instead of being one fish in an ocean full of guys who could talk and we're all trying to make their money that way, you suddenly became the one guy, or at least one of only a handful of guys in the UFC, certainly the best guy at it, who could talk people into the building. So in many ways, your pro wrestling sort of interest and even sort of brief flirtation with the business set you up for ultimately your success in MMA.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. I think being a fan of wrestling and of the psychology and really studying it, I think that did help. And to your point, yeah, I would have just been one of the guys in wrestling. But, you take that. There's some baseball player, and if I could produce his name right now, it would help my story. But a couple of years he came out, he started doing crazy interviews, and he grew this weird beard. And
oh, yeah, I know who you mean. Yeah.
He really wasn't a very good interview, and the beard wasn't all that good of a gimmick. But in that space, it absolutely was. I mean, I remember John McEnroe from tennis. He was just a dick with an attitude. But in that space, he's still the legend. Nobody's even touched him. Now, if he would have come over to pro wrestling, he'd have just been a guy in the back.